Hi everyone. So we like to talk a little bit about the ingress of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, focusing specifically on the developmental arc from Capricorn to Aquarius. So in Capricorn and Saturn, the archetypes, we're dealing with anything that is formed, that is defined, that can be held within a construct. We can think of Saturn Capricorn as the gravity of consciousness, meaning consciousness doesn't have any gravity, but it's sort of like where it's conditioned to just fall. So it's our own personal thermostat. If a guest is coming for dinner, you're going to set the table in a certain way. You know, if you're dealing with a certain relationship experience, there's a conditioning to it. There's a filter through which we're going to perceive the entirety of our experience, not according to our values, not according to our philosophy, not according to what we like even, but it's just conditioned. And we aren't even necessarily aware of our conditioning. It's just sort of set. The deeper introspection and self-reflection really with Saturn and Capricorn is always about becoming aware of our conditioning and thinking, oh, what works? What do I want to create? Learning that authority, that self-responsibility to establish a structural reality that reflects the life I want to build. It takes self-knowledge and self-wisdom, but for the most part, Capricorn Saturn just says a lot of the life that we're living is sort of an assumed construct that you can just say, here's the sentence, that's just how it is, right? That's just how it is. And really differentiate that between Sagittarius, which is like a cosmology, it's a way of understanding. Capricorn's simplified in a certain way. It's like, that's just how it is. That's just how men are. This is how you do, this is the right way to do a family, the right way to do relationships. And you can take that into any area of life. And this can easily then become unchecked judgments, unchecked ideas about what things are. And so we repress our nature, our true individuality, and then we actually have to sort of put that judgment onto other people because we have an idea of what it's supposed to look like. So there can be this trick with Capricorn of accidentally or not accidentally holding this energy of conformity, which can really suppress the life force and the blossoming of creative energy, the blossoming of life that has its own intelligence to it. So everything that's formed and defined and structured, when we move into Aquarius and Uranus, there's always something that doesn't fit into that. For every gender and sexual identity, even if you have a list of 20 different options, there's always going to be someone that doesn't naturally on their own resonate. And again, this isn't like a philosophy where I'm like thinking about what is my philosophy on relationship and sexuality. It's more of an unintentional experience of resonance. You know, it's like you find your people and you're not looking for them. You meet someone and you just sense, oh, you're my friend. We can walk through a forest and just land upon a sense of, this is where I want to be. Resonance from an Aquarius Uranus point of view is unintentional, it's uncontrived, it's the energy of universal harmony, life coming together on its own. But if you try to fit a construct, if you try to fit what is into a construct first, you end up missing out on the natural unfolding of creation. And so we'd love to delve a little more into this with Jupiter and Saturn now in Aquarius.
Yeah, and it's as though we've gone from, an era of unquestioned identification with form. This is like akin to colonized thinking, Capricorn. This is what is, and everyone falls into this traditional structure, and therefore Aquarius, you're outside of the norm if you don't resonate with those structures. And there's an element of trauma almost, but it's more of like a breaking apart that happens when you move into a psychological understanding that both those structures are not necessarily the truth. They're simply a formation of the past, of stories that have just been layered upon layer, and people have built their lives around them being particularly true, but they don't necessarily, that doesn't make them true. It makes, a contract, but it doesn't necessarily make it so. And the whole deconditioning process that happens moving into Aquarius, moving outside of the norm, when you start to realize that more and more people don't actually resonate with those structures, and you find yourself, well, we don't actually know what those things are. You know, I find a lot of people in economics, in the financial world, like, don't resonate with the stock market or with the traditional institutions like banks. But we haven't figured out yet how to do exchange of energy and time and resource fully in a way that is actually akin to how life itself provides for us. And so this movement into, well, what is a different form of reciprocity or connection or family or living, is a breaking apart of actually the conditioned mind that has said, well, this is the way it's so, like, this is how we do it.
There can be a lot of fear there. So the very beginning of the Aquarian energy, coming from all this Capricorn, there are a few ways in which any of us might be dealing with this transition. So the first is fear. It's like, you're free from the known. That's what Aquarius, Jeff Green's book on Uranus, Freedom from the Known, quoting Krishnamurti, is you're free from the known. It's like, what does that mean? You don't know what this is. You have to not know. There has to be a certain level of freedom and emptiness and openness in the mind to come into the realization and the experience. And so the issue with Jupiter is Jupiter wants philosophical cohesion and clarity. It wants consistency. It wants to be able to wrap its mind around a greater understanding. And so what can happen here are two things. One, we can be trying to uphold the past and reshaping changing circumstances to fit into the known. And what that essentially creates is this pressure where it's almost like taking a pressure cooker and trying to keep the lid on while the heat's intensifying. As time unfolds, that pressure will just burst. And the other dynamic, and this is very common with Aquarius energy in general, in transit with Uranus or Aquarius planets or in your natal chart, where there can be sort of a lag of suppressed energy, where it's like, you know, the parent that just works 9 to 5 and does their job and follows the route, but they're suppressing their own individual, like, they don't fit into that. That's not them. And the insecurity of acknowledging that means, well, I only know that, and thus not that, to me means all kinds of associations of bad or not good or not responsible. So there might be a suppression of this individuality, and then it kind of builds, and then one day they wake up and they just walk, right? You just quit your job, you just leave the relationship, you just don't, you walk out on stage in your live performance. That's a very, very common Aquarian Uranian phenomenon. And so the way to avoid that is to actually get in touch with any energy of anxiety, any impeding sense of doom or crisis, or this deep sense of discontent. Jupiter, it's restless, so it wants to move, right? But the way to channel that is to orient our attention towards, I'm free. I am free right now, and my life circumstances, Aquarius, harmonize effortlessly because it's the intelligence of creation to resonate with my own freedom. And it's how we can be in a clearer, more grounded relationship to the experience of shocks and surprises and unexpected things that you just didn't imagine would happen, because the unfolding of life, the trajectory of oneness, is coming together without consideration to our conditioning. Like, the role of conditioning isn't to control the movement of consciousness, the movement of creation. The role of conditioning is to learn how to be in alignment as we walk this path. How to work with time and space consciously, actually in the unraveling of time and space. So to have an open mind and begin to cultivate an attitude that really just more deeply resonates with freedom and the truth of our belonging and our path.
I think of when sudden disruption happens, there's two states of being that can arise. One is total reaction to what's happening, like devastation, the drama of the life ensues, and it comes from this attachment to the story of things being a certain way. And the other is a sense of complete calm and clarity that resonates with being in total presence to something that's arising. And when we are seeing, oh, life changes, something that might be otherwise considered disruptive happening to break apart our life, when we're resting in this presence of like seeing that this is happening, it's like almost like watching a car accident, and total calm in responding to what unfolds naturally, as if we know that we're being guided to a new life, we know that we're being guided to a new way of living, but we actually can't yet cognitively understand to the extent to which we're invested in a story from the past. And I've been thinking a lot about how deeply we hold on to the stories of the past, how even a sense of security can be invested in the most traumatic stories, particularly family stories or origin stories or relationship stories that have deep traumas embedded in them. There's a way in which they have almost provided psychological security to hold on to them. And that the calling, at least in my experience right now, is to keep releasing those stories, because to the extent that they form the lens of which I'm seeing the world, they prevent me from actually being in the present moment and seeing life as it's unfolding right in front of me. Therefore, things don't come as shock or surprise in trauma and drama to my system, but they actually arise as grace, like unfolding the present moment. And the reality of what's happening in life is that life wants to transform. It really does. It wants to guide us forward into a new form of living that is free from a construct of the past, that's free from a story. Even astrology is essentially formulations of stories about archetypes, and I'm starting to recognize the way these archetypes want to break apart inside of the myth that we live in and be retold by us, be re-experienced in the present moment in a way that is like not the story that we know. And this is a whole deconditioning process that leads us somewhere that we can't fathom what life is like inside of that.
This is why you hear from all the teachers that you can't describe awakening. You can't describe it because it's not something that can fit into a construct of the mind. It's a direct experience of what is and the true nature of reality. And I just love really banking on this idea that everything in life is just completely impersonal. You often speak about this idea of remembering the future. And it bespeaks this notion that what's meant to be will be. The trajectory and the unfolding of life has its own intelligence to it. And I think what really draws a line between sort of the struggle in waking up and remembering ourselves and healing and returning to who we are, and then abiding in that, is a difference between a false sense of control and the experience of what is. And Jeffrey Wolfe often said regarding Uranus, this is not the past. What's happening now is not the past. And it's a very simple statement. He would often say it in terms of people going through trauma or seeing in the chart how certain things are being perceived and projecting past trauma onto the moment. And he would say a useful thing to tell this client or this person is what's happening now is not what happened in the past. It's so simple, yet it's actually quite profound, because when we begin to look at the present moment, we see there's no context for it. There's no basis to judge it for. The only basis we have to judge this present moment is the known. And the known actually was never quite reliable. The known was always just the parameters that we've established in our mind. We've never seen things for what they actually are. So there's a threshold in our awakening when consciousness is predominantly defined by the Saturn dimension, by form, time, and space, as it shifts to what is. This threshold that we cross is the threshold from living with a whole bunch of boxes, and thus needing to maintain some level of control, to the direct experience of what actually is. And in that, there's not a lot of knowing. There's not a lot to hold on to. So it doesn't offer security in the old sense of what security is. But it offers security in a true sense, because consciousness doesn't need to grab onto something for its own dear survival anymore. There's a trust in the togetherness, into the nature of resonance and harmony that's inherent to life, and the unfolding of all things.
Freedom is my holy name. Freedom is my holy name. Freedom is my holy name. My holy name. My holy name. Oh, oh, oh. Oh, oh. Is my holy name. Freedom is my holy name. Freedom is my holy name. My holy name. My holy name.